Other missions, because not only are we working in Karamoja, we're working in other parts of Uganda in terms of practical missions. Some time ago, more than a year ago, I introduced a colleague of the ministry, Billy Epperhart. Billy is a consultant to this ministry on organizational management. He also does a large amount of teaching in our business track. And Billy also has his own, what they call a Christian social impact company called Tricor Global. I took Billy to Uganda with me over a year ago, probably more now, and introduced him to Bishop Herbert Kiwanuka. Andrew has a connection, a partner in Kampala called Bishop Herbert Kiwanuka of Glory of Christ Church. He is a remarkable leader. I believe the function of a leader is to make space for the creativity of other people. That is my passionate belief. But seldom have I seen it in action like this Bishop Herbert Kiwanuka, this Ugandan bishop. He has a huge church in Kampala, around about 5,000 people, but he's planted over 100 churches around Uganda and in neighboring countries. He loves Andrew, loves the ministry. He teaches grace. And he inspires his people he looks at the needs of the community and basically finds ways of meeting those needs by inspiring his people and their creativity. And one of the things he was doing when I met him was he serves a slum area called Kasubi on the eastern side of Kampala, western side of Kampala, I beg your pardon. And basically these people, the majority of people, the Christians there, have no access to finance. And they were coming to the church for loans. And basically the church started lending money and started teaching people what I call microfinance or microenterprise. But the demand was so great, they didn't have the capital. So I took Billy Epperhart with me. Billy is a very accomplished businessman and a phenomenal business teacher. As we know, he's taught here many times in the sanctuary through business conferences, but also on our business track. I took Billy and I showed him the setup. Small though it was, there was real integrity there, which is not easy to find in some of the African countries. Billy was so impressed by this that he decided to set up a bank called Glowtrans. So over a year ago, we established a bank lending primarily to born-again Christians in Kampala and the greater Kampala area. He initially raised $500,000 in the space of literally a few days, and now looking to raise considerably more, but we found the demand was so great because what was happening in Kampala, the Muslim community is only 12% of the population in Uganda. But I can tell you that they wield huge influence because they own most of the businesses, the banks, the hotels. They use commerce and business as the weapon of choice. They don't need jihad in Uganda because basically these guys are winning the hearts and minds of people through banking and commerce, and they do it very well. So we need to redress that balance. And what was happening was the Christian community, their churches and the land that their churches occupied was being bought from under them. Or the Muslim community was giving loans for people to buy the land around Christian churches, and then the churches were being closed down. Yet at the same time, on the roads leading out of Kampala, every 10 miles or 5 to 10 miles, there was strategically being established a mosque. And the Muslim community were freely offering to teach children in their own unique style, and offering free food and, in some cases, free lending. So, Billy and the business school talk about the 7 mountains of influence, probably the most important one being the business mountain because it's the one that funds the rest. Without that, whoever basically has control of the purse strings of a nation can control the spiritual climate is what they say. I believe Oral Roberts made that claim. We're also trying to produce a condensed version of our business course here that we can use to help some of our schools in other parts of the world, where we can teach and train our graduates and possibly provide some seed funding for them to also start up their own businesses, so that we can kind of counter some of this that's going on in the commercial world. There is a project, these are the other projects. There is a project in Lake Victoria called Zinga Island or Bugo Island. They have different names for it, where the same Bishop Herbert of Glory of Christ Church owns quite a few acres of land, the church owns, and they want to set up a model farm project. Many of the islands in Lake Victoria, the people are completely isolated. They're only half an hour from Kampala across the water, but these people are isolated with very basic facilities. They can grow anything. It's like the land that time forgot. I've seen maize plants 10 feet tall with corn cobs like missiles, I mean huge. Pineapples like just enormous, 18 inches high. But nothing is organized, and they have no means of getting this produce to the mainland. You have to go there, you get into a little creek, you go through papyrus reeds. Sometimes you have to walk and pull the canoes over the papyrus reeds to get into the lake, to get across to these islands. Very, very isolated communities. But we are trying to help Bishop Herbert with a model farm project on the island. Just to give you an example, I said to the bishop and to his staff, look guys, if you're going to go and do this, I think my opinion would be, humble opinion, is first of all, you need to win the hearts and the minds of these people before you start coming in from the outside and trying to change their way of life, because that's how they may perceive it. Why don't we go in, take the Jesus movie, take a team and go and preach the gospel and try and establish a bridgehead there. Well, Ricky Burge, my young man on the ground, without whom we couldn't do what we do, he was a former drug dealer from Gary, Indiana, one of the toughest cities in America with the highest murder rate, I think, per capita for the last 14 years. This young man got gloriously saved. He came to Charis here. He was one of the most godly young men I've ever come across, totally focused. He works for the ministry on the ground out there as our operations manager, because you cannot oversee from Colorado what's going on in Africa without having people on the ground. I learned many years ago, you can only oversee what you can see. It's not long before the wheels come off unless you've got a good system on the ground. Oh, Ricky Burge, he said to me, I'll take a team from the church. He took 21 people in a huge canoe or several canoes. They went over, they slept under the stars. But basically, they took the backpack and they showed the Jesus movie to the people on Zinga Island. They were there 3 days. By the end of 3 days, they had a church of 50 established. People were saved, baptized in the Holy Spirit, and healed. And we now have a church on that place, on that land. Now we've got a bridgehead. Now we can start to influence the community, maybe drill a couple of wells or whatever, but this is the way we need to do it. But the other thing we need to do is to provide a boat, if you like, a ferry, because otherwise they can't get there without great difficulty. We want to make this a model farm. You've got to be able to transport the goods, the produce, to the mainland. So we need to help them build a boat or have a boat built, and we need a jetty or a pier, however you want to call it, where they can land, very easily land and load the produce onto the boats. So that's another project that we're involved in. Establishing the aquaponics site, that's already happening as I speak. There are some guys building out the aquaponics system here on the sanctuary. We can use it to demonstrate practical missions. We can experiment. What I want to do here is recreate the conditions in Karamoja and be able to build a system using the materials that they have in their environment. It's no good us building a fancy state-of-the-art system. We cannot reproduce that in Karamoja. We cannot obtain the necessary parts and materials. We need to dumb down, if I can use that expression respectfully, dumb down the system we will build here, do one outside that can basically be reproduced to reproduce the conditions in Karamoja, and that they can do very easily and very cost effectively. And obviously we want the model to be self-financing. So let me just talk a little bit about the achievements so far. I've told you about what we want to do. What have we done so far? Well, before we drilled the wells, I found water was the biggest issue. 50% of people die because of waterborne diseases. 50% of all hospital beds throughout the world are occupied by people suffering from waterborne diseases. So in these areas where I visited in Karamoja, we work with a denomination called the PAG, the Pentecostal Assemblies of God of Uganda. We have the full backing and support of the national leader, Bishop Simon Peter Imiao. He's become a very good friend. He's a tremendous mentor and friend to Ricky Burge, our young man, our young operations manager in Uganda. And they have over 6,000 churches. They are the denomination with the largest number of churches in the Karamoja region. They have about 90 churches. And many people were coming to these churches to be discipled. They were walking miles from the bush. And of course, they need to provide water and food for these people when they come, because many of them walk miles, have to stay over, they sleep outside. Well, I figured a lot of the time in Karamoja, they don't have water. They just collect rainwater, they try and dam up the rivers. But to be honest with you, it disappears in no time. But they dig these big ponds and they try and collect the water. And I mean, this water turns to mud. The animals are in there drinking from it and stomping around in it. People are bathing in it, and then they're drinking it. And it's little wonder that these people are subject to so many terrible waterborne diseases. And malaria is rife in the place. And most of the times I've gone, there isn't even a drop of water to be had. But where there is, I figured if we can provide water filters for each community in each church location, at least the water they do have can be made safe. So about a year ago, I got a hold of 90 water filters for each community, for each church, which will provide water for up to 200 people for maybe 2 years on a daily basis. And I say we, Ricky Burge and the team on the ground there, went to every location and set up and taught them how to use these water filters, so that basically those 90 locations would have safe drinking water. And that's been a huge success. And that was done through the generosity of partners and supporters of this ministry. But that was a huge achievement because Karamoja is a large area. But we did that through our partnership with Billy Epperhart and Tricord Global Organization. We have partnered to set up GlowTrans Bank. And GlowTrans Bank is lending to the born-again community of believers in Uganda who basically were not able to obtain finance. Through Billy's efforts, we've been able to set up this organization. I sit on the board of that organization. And we have saved countless numbers of churches and Christian ministries from going under, because they were being pressured by Muslim landlords or other landlords, just generally people who were not very sympathetic, if you like, towards the Christian faith. So that's been a huge success, and Billy continues to increase investment. The desire of his heart and our hearts is to see GlowTrans become a national bank, with branches all over Uganda and then into the neighboring countries. And we're on the road to achieving that, albeit we're at the beginning. We also, during the last year, facilitated the complete equipping of 2 medical centers in and around Kampala. One at the Glory of Christ Church. When I visited there in 2014-15, they showed me this wonderful facility with about 8 rooms, and they had staff who were qualified, but they had no equipment. The only piece of equipment they had was a sterilization unit that Andrew had donated some time before. It really touched my heart, because this was just to see 8 empty rooms where people should be ministered to and having medical help. There was nothing. The staff were there, they were keen, but they were without resources. I came back, I prayed about it. I said, Lord, and this is where it's great for us to partner with other ministries. There is no point in reinventing the wheel. I came, I did some research. I found right here on our doorstep in Denver an organization called Project Cure, a Christian organization, the world's biggest supplier of medical equipment used and refurbished all over the world. Huge organization. I contacted them. I went up to see them. I said, we have the situation in Uganda. Can you help me? Now, it took us 18 months. I think it was November last year when I was there in Kampala. I have film footage to show the arrival of the container on its journey from the US all the way to Mombasa in Kenya, and then all the way overland and over the border into Kampala. But we were able to obtain a container load of equipment that completely equipped this medical center. But there was so much equipment that I was even able to update and re-equip another medical center belonging to my friend I told you about right at the beginning, where we first went to Uganda all those years ago with Leslie in Bweyogerere. It was called Wellspring Project. They have their own medical center, and we were able to fully equip that as well. So what a blessing that has been. It cost the ministry about $30,000 to transport, and it took us 18 months of red tape and bureaucracy to get the equipment there. But at the end of the day, we received about $500,000 worth of equipment for $30,000 investment, a lot of time and effort as well, but well worth it. To see the Glory of Christ Medical Center now performing operations. They recently had a top surgeon was so interested in what was going on that he came. He got gloriously saved, filled with the Spirit, and that surgeon is now performing voluntarily operations in the medical center, serving the slum area there in Kasubi, in Kampala. What an incredible testimony. We've put the full-time operations manager, Ricky Burge, on the ground, without whom we could not do what we do. We've established phenomenal relations with the Pentecostal Assemblies of God of Uganda. As I said, they have over 6,000 churches. They have influence in other countries. And we have a direct personal relationship with the top leaders. And we've trained those top leaders using the discipleship evangelism program. Bishop Simon Peter said it was the perfect program to reach the Karamojong. He'd been trying for 20 years. Now, what we had to do was change the system so that we train the leaders, the top leaders, and get buy-in from them. What we found was we were training anybody who would listen, and that is not very effective. But we learned from these things, and now we know the right way to go about it. But we have full support from the PAG. We're continuing the DE program in Karamoja. We've been holding major training conferences, as I've just said, training the leaders so that they in turn can train their people. Of the 11 water wells I mentioned earlier, we've drilled 6 so far, and the other 5 are on the point of being drilled. That's providing fresh water to communities who have never had access to water. And we have 7 new languages added to the discipleship evangelism program, with another 3 just waiting to be vetted, quality controlled, proofread. Just want to show you some of the players involved in the demo department. We have Bishop Francis Tumusimi, who goes out with his team and teaches and trains. We have Ricky Burge, our operations manager, on the ground. Rudy Van Tonda is our new regional director for Africa. He's based in Cape Town. Rudy has also been to Karamoja. He donated a truck from the South African partners and a trailer which had a screen and a generator. He drove that all the way from Cape Town, the southern tip of Africa, all the way to Karamoja, thousands of kilometers, crossing borders where they asked him for bribes, which he refused. An incredible story, but Rudy is our new regional director. We've split the international operations into a number of regions to make reporting back here so much easier and help us efficiently manage and operate the international side of the ministry. Rudy and his wife Cam are our South African directors for Andrew Wommack Ministries. They're about to open 2 new schools there, one in Cape Town and one in Johannesburg, which I think are going to be a huge success. Rudy has a passion for all things African and is a great supporter. Then we have, of course, Billy Epperhart. Billy and I have traveled, I don't know how many times now, to Africa. We're about to go in another few weeks. Billy has been a phenomenal help, giving advice. They've done a lot of this work in Malawi and Kenya, but he's just completely joined with the ministry now as an integral part of everything that we do. He's an invaluable resource, and he's a great traveling companion. Brings a whole, just so much advice and experience. Myself and Gary Everett is our Ugandan director. He runs Lighthouse Television, which has been broadcasting Andrew now 24/7 for at least the last 10 years. The station belonged to Idi Amin, the dictator. It was funded by the communists, the Chinese. Pastor Bob Nichols, who's on the board of Andrew Wommack Ministries, purchased that about 17, 18, 19 years ago, somewhere around that time. And they've been using it to broadcast the gospel in Uganda for the last, that number of years, 24 hours a day. And then last but not least is my wife, Leslie. That was her on a recent visit to Karamoja, surrounded by Karamojong people watching her as she took pictures of them on the iPad. She's overseeing the translations for us. Just some pictures of a recent trip to Karamoja. That's Ricky Burge holding the crutches. Literally 2 days before I arrived, he had a major accident. He was riding a motorbike, what they call a boda boda, coming down a hill, and somebody pulled out right in front of him. And he leapt off the bike to stop himself and went into the side of the vehicle with his feet rather than his head, snapped his leg. That was literally 2 days before I arrived. He greeted me at midnight at Entebbe Airport in Kampala on crutches. And we were due to go to Karamoja with this team who were going to drill wells for us. That's our transport, the trusty Cessna Caravan. I don't know how many trips I've made now. We just land literally in the bush. Sometimes they have to clear an airstrip for us. But that's how we get to Karamoja from Kampala. It would take a full day by road, and you'd be shaken to pieces by the time you got there. So this is a wonderful way of us getting there. This is a riverbed. Ricky was trying to negotiate on his crutches, which he'd only had for 2 days. We walked 2 miles along a dry riverbed to find a village where we were going to drill a well. He was sinking sort of 9 to 12 inches into the sand. It was fine, bone dry. His hands were bleeding with the effort, but such is his determination, he just shrugged it off. Didn't bother Ricky at all. This is the team, that's the riverbed, that's where the water should be. There was a little church. This was the place, a church under the tree. They established a church, no building, but they wanted to put a water well there. On the journey, we met these 2 young girls trying to dig down into the riverbed to get water. That was the last of the water, which you can see is green and just unfit for human consumption, but that's what they were drinking. This was the little village. This is a tribe of people called the Pokot in the southern end of Karamoja, near a town called Amudat, where we're currently drilling the wells. That's their houses. You can see me. I'm not a big guy, but I'm stood there. I couldn't get through that doorway. And yet, these houses were built by the women for the men. The women sleep outside, the men sleep inside. You can see how slim the Karamojong men are, that they can get into that. This young girl was probably all of about 13, but she was a bride. And she was showing me leaves that they'd picked off the tree in a plastic bag that they were collecting to eat. Another village near Amadat is called Komaret. The reason I want to show you this is because this is just a testimony of how the discipleship evangelism program can change people's lives. This young lady in the picture, in that navy blue and white dress, is called Esther. I met her on my first trip when I went to do the feasibility study, the research for Andrew. Esther is a young mother of at least 5 or 6 children. She used to walk from Komaret, which is a village just the other side of a mountain we fly over to get to Amadat. We literally skirt the top of this mountain by about 100 feet. I met Esther. She was walking from her village to Amadat, which is about, 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers. 14 miles, something like that. To walk, to be discipled. Such was her compassion. Now, this young mother of 5 or 6 children, and she is young, by the way, she did not speak English, and she was completely illiterate. This was my visit just a few months ago. That's in 2016. In the space of just 2 to 3 years, this woman, she translated for me. She now speaks English. Through studying the DE and the Bible, she can now read. She's working on the writing, but she can read. She can speak English. She has her own business. She has established 3 churches, and she is the pastor of this church in her community in Komaret. I think that is incredible, all because of the discipleship evangelism program. This is the little church that she's the pastor of. It's just made of clay and mud walls with a tin roof, but it's church, and the people of the village respect her. Now, this is a culture which is truly male chauvinist. The women are just considered possessions, and they're traded for cattle. Young girls as young as 9 and 10, I am told, have been married off or exchanged as a bride for cattle. The practice of female genital mutilation is widespread, and many of these young girls die from infections, but they're considered possessions. Well, here we are. Here's Esther through the DE. She now is the pastor of the church in her village. I promised her 3 years ago, to the best of my ability, I would bring a water well to her village. And we are just about to fulfill that promise. This woman now is highly respected in her community, on a par with the men, and even beyond, because she has delivered, or God has delivered, through her faithfulness and through her servant heart. I think it's an incredible story. Some of the people in the village, they were just so excited to see us there, and we talked about the water well. And this is Ricky Burge. They call him Lokilu, the Karamojong. They've given him his own name. He has such a connection with the people. This is the young man, former drug dealer from Gary, Indiana. And he has such a heart for these people, such a passion and a compassion. They love him. And he knows more about Karamoja now than anybody I know. They've given him a name, Lokilu Lokitere. It means the one who brings the rain, who plows the ground and reaps the harvest. What an incredible accolade for this young man. So let's just talk finally about the future. The future for Demo, discipleship, evangelism, missional outreach. For the future, we intend to be more strategic in planting new Andrew Wommack offices and schools. We need to work with our world outreach team here. We now have an international team in the space of a year that's grown from just me part-time to a team headed up by Mike and Carrie Pickett, who are the founders of our Russian ministry. Amazing couple. They now have a team of 7 people looking at and overseeing the international, which is incredible. We need to work with them strategically to say, where do we want to be in the future? Which countries do we need to penetrate? And start to plan with them and use the DE ahead of time to plow the ground, to start plowing the ground, to prepare the ground to establish new schools and new offices. A more strategic approach. We need to identify with them future country locations. Where do we want to be? We need to then translate the discipleship evangelism program into the languages of those countries ahead of time. Often we can do that through students, or we pay professional translators to do it, but we need to go with the tools in our hands, especially in countries where people do not know Andrew. This is the only way, is to start to build relationships. So we go into those countries with the DE. We identify church groups or other Christian ministries who are open to our message. Because we are not a church, we have the added advantage of being able to go in and offer to empower the church. And we will offer the discipleship program to those leaders. But we start, as we've learnt in Uganda, not starting with anybody that will listen, but start with the leaders in centers of influence. That way we get buy-in at the top level. We train the leaders who will then train their leaders and their people. That is the way that we need to do that. And this will be very, very effective as we start to prepare the ground. As we're making disciples, we need to identify those with linguistic or language skills, because the next step is to then go deeper. The discipleship evangelism introduces people to the Christian faith and to the grace message, to Andrew's teaching and revelation, but it's like a buffet, a smorgasbord. Just little tidbits, little bits here and there. But we need to go deeper. And then we have many Bible studies. Charis Bible Studies is a huge success, but in some of these countries, we don't have alumni, but we do have material like Sharper Than a Two-Edged Sword, which takes 16 of Andrew's teachings and goes in greater depth. And then each one of those teachings will have a Bible study or a work study. We need to then translate some of this material. So what we're doing is taking people deeper and deeper, and we're preparing the ground. The next logical stage is for them to translate Charis first-year curriculum, which can be done by correspondence or whatever. So as you can see, there is a strategic pathway to basically creating potential students and advocates of the ministry and its message. One of the other things I want to do, and I'm working on currently with Demo, is not only provide the word in the form of the discipleship evangelism program, but I want to provide a whole range of tools to empower the church. So, for example, I'm currently working on a condensed version of the business course to create what I call DE for Business, a similar format with questions and answers at the end of each lesson that can be taught by anybody pretty much. I would like to see a DE for leadership, a DE for IT, a DE for admin and finance. In other words, all the life skills that you need. When I pioneered a church in the UK with my wife, Leslie, we had those business skills. Without that, we would not have been the success that God allowed us to be. But not everybody has those skills, and particularly in developing countries, we need to be able to go in there, we give them the word. Part of teaching them to fish is to empower them with other skills, other training. So my intention is that we will have a whole toolkit of other subjects that we can teach these guys alongside. Because if we continue trying to drill water wells for every single community, it would bankrupt us. What we need to do is arm them with information, with knowledge and practical skills. I've realized that we cannot meet all the needs financially, practically, and many cases, these people are not looking that. They're looking for that. They're looking for help. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for know-how, and we can provide that. So that's something I'm going to be working on. I've got somebody looking at a DE of IT, basic computer training, like Leslie did all those years ago, which is why we ended up in Uganda. So that's something else. I want to begin to establish relationships in those countries and then start to translate the Charis curriculum too. So what we effectively get is a funnel, and you start with DE at the top. You start, then next you go down to the Bible studies, going deeper, and then finally CBC. So in conclusion, what can you do? I've shared with you what Demo is doing, and the question remains, what can you do? Do you have to wait until I get round to the country that you're currently in? Of course not. Let me tell you what Uganda have done. We have a school in Kampala. The director of that school, Hans Backstein, decided to set up his own department for Demo to mirror what we're doing here in the States. And he assigned a team of students under the control of a guy called Godfrey, who is a graduate of the school. And basically, they've set up a department. They are running 11 discipleship evangelism courses in different parts of Uganda. At the same time, he's got this team of 6 students and graduates translating the discipleship evangelism course into local dialects. This is incredible. Ricky Burge is going to be overseeing them in Kampala and taking them out on missions to put into practice what they're teaching, and to go to the Karamojong even. He's going to take our students to give them missions experience. This could be done all over the world in any of our locations. Australia, for example, are the ones that had this funnel approach, starting with the DE. Byron Hamilton, our director, basically gives the DE freely. Then he has the groups give their details, and he establishes all these groups on a database. He's got nearly 200 groups across Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Indonesia, the Philippines. It is absolutely incredible. He's got them all on computer. People can click on and find out where their nearest group is. And they are going from DE, first of all, to the Bible studies, and then to Charis first year curriculum. Incredible story, and the favor that is being shown to these guys. We've had a Fijian chief, give land for the ministry to build its own college on the islands of Fiji, right near a new international airport. This has been given us freely by this chief because of the DE program. India are doing the same. They're running DE groups all over India. So you don't have to wait for us. I call this funnel defunnel. It's play on the word DE funnel. And basically, we can do this anywhere. I spoke to our Brazilian director just this week. He's using the DE in 5 homes, rehab centers for abused women. It's being used in prisons and schools. You don't have to wait for us to come along. You can start right where you are. Because one thing is for sure, DE, discipleship evangelism, is the best tool that we have to plow the ground, get people saved, filled with the Holy Spirit, and enabled to disciple others. So I hope what I've shared gives you some insight into the work of Demo, how we came about, what we've achieved thus far, but also where we're going. But this tool is in your hands and can be used to great effect to see the gospel go as far and deep as possible, because the gospel must first be preached in all the earth, and then the end will come. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. God bless you.